Now, with 2 years still to go until Nigeria's 2027 general elections, the political atmosphere is already heating up, and not entirely according to the rules now. Across the country, campaign posters and materials for the 2027 elections have begun appearing in major cities, despite INEC's clear ban on premature campaigns. In states like Kogi and others, of course, the ruling party rallies and billboards have already been spotted in key public spaces. From rallies in Kogi to campaign billboards, posters emerging in several states, appears that political parties, including the ruling APC, are already setting the stage for 2027.
Well, today the electoral umpire finds itself under intense scrutiny because observers and civil society groups are calling on INEC to act swiftly and decisively. Otherwise, they warn the competitive playing field may be skewed before the race even formally begins. Now, joining us to discuss this, we have Towo Seruwaja, a lawyer and public affairs analyst. Together, we'll explore what these early campaign activities say about the enforcement of Nigeria's election laws, whether INEC's silence or inaction could undermine fairness and credibility in the 2027 polls. And finally, what must be done now to preserve the integrity of the electoral process? Thank you so much for joining us on Breakfast Extra, Towo.
You're welcome and good morning.
Good morning.
Now, INEC has come under fire as campaign posters for 2027 are already surfacing nationwide, despite a clear electoral ban. From a legal standpoint, how much power does INEC really have to enforce compliance before the official campaign period?
Let me first of all take us through the provision of the law that regards to a campaign, or that gives the power, or that establish the INEC, which is the electoral body, and also that gives them power to function. If you look at the provision of the Constitution, which is the mother of all laws, you look at it that if you look at from section 221 to 227 creates the provision for creates INEC, recognize INEC as the electoral body to conduct election in Nigeria, and also spell out some of the functions of INEC, and also create some responsibility entrusted to INEC. Then if you also look at section 2 of the Electoral Act 2022, it also clearly spell out the provision of the functions and powers of INEC. So let's look at the provision of the Constitution. The Constitution clearly stated that INEC has the power to register and deregister a political party. Also talks about the issue of INEC inspecting the financial books of a political party, and also give INEC the power to take custody of money sourced from money source outside Nigeria. Then if you also look at it, it created a provision whereby by section 227 of the electoral of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria now creates a dicey position whereby it gives the power to the National Assembly to prescribe what could be known as an offense, or what could be known as a breach of political parties or individuals. And it stated it clearly. If you look at it, referred to section 221, which has to do with individuals or association promoting election. So now let's boil down to the Electoral Act. If you look at the Electoral Act did not give INEC any power to, do you understand, to prosecute or at the same time stop anything that has to do with campaign. Then if you look at it holistically, what we'll be looking at is section 95 of the Electoral Act 2025 that talks about what a public campaign should be. And a public campaign, if you look at it carefully, it mentions certain categories that can be described as campaign. You look at the issue of the state apparatus. What should be the state apparatus? We talk about state medias and every other stuff. Then you also look at public media. What should be public media? Should become issue of like your station now, which can be made public, or let's just say all these digital billboard operated by government. You look at the signposts operated by government. Then if you go further, you now look at the issue of newspaper publication and all those stuff. So when you look at it holistically, you discover that at this point in time, you will now look at what a public campaign means by the Electoral Act. Public campaign, by virtue of section 152 of the Electoral Act, talks or made it clear to the public that public campaign is known as the day or period in which INEC declare, which is the 160 days as declared prior to the election, then and ought to stop 24 hours before the poll day. So these are the distinct. Who is a candidate that can be caught up with that within that provision of the law is someone who has been nominated by a political party. So all these posters you are seeing cannot fall under this provision as I've explained by the Constitution or the Electoral Act. And surprising to say that if you look at the case of Atiku and INEC, I think it's a case decided in 2023. The Supreme Court said that the rules and regulation of the INEC as a body cannot supersede or contravene express provision of the Electoral Act. So irrespective of whatever INEC is going to do now, their hands are tied, because you cannot in any way, by virtue of the Interpretation Act of Public Campaigning or by virtue of the Interpretation Act of a candidate, you cannot in any way infer or construe this to be public campaign, as he said.
It's actually a good thing you pointed all of these out, Towa, but many Nigerians have actually said that INEC's response has been slow or weak. And we want to ask, do you think INEC is being too lenient, or are their hands tied by the Electoral Act and enforcement limitations?
First of all, there is nothing to enforce there. That is one thing I should understand. Okay. Then two, INEC does not have the constitutional or legislative backing to enforce anything that has to do with campaign. That has to do with what is happening now. Because another thing we should also look at, does the law provide or does the law describe what a public campaign is or what campaign should be? If the answer is yes, and I can take you to the Electoral Act, which I talked about, the Interpretation Act. So the other thing again is INEC is kind of, their hands are tied because they don't have such power. And two, the issue of campaign has to do with candidates and political party. And you see these people coming at, they are swear known that, okay, they can be traced to a political party. And as Tinubu is today, it cannot be said by virtue of the Electoral Act and by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria that is a candidate, is the nominated candidate of APC as it is, or Atiku of another political party, or Peter Obi of another political party. It cannot be said to be so until they conduct their primaries. So what we should be looking at is that, does INEC has that power? The answer is no. Then two, is there any breach to the Electoral Act currently as it stands now by virtue of the laws I've just mentioned or just quoted? Because we work by law, we act by law, and anything that ought to bring anything that has to do with sanction, if you look at section 36, subsection 8 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, it must be something known by law. So it's as a result of ignorance that the public is crying, but we could also make sure that these areas of concern raised by the public should be acted upon by what? Amending the Electoral Act to give INEC power or to give other agencies power to deal with this kind of situation.
Now, some of these posters clearly show names and faces of known politicians. Should INEC sanction these individuals or their parties, or does the law require proof that the candidates themselves authorized the materials?
Well, if INEC want to sanction, INEC will sanction under, it's not even INEC, it's left for the court. INEC is to report to the police that have the bigger power to investigate and also prosecute any criminal case through the office of the Attorney General of the Federation. Now, if you look at the area that will be looked at in that regard, knowing the faces, individuals, political party, it has to do with section 94, subsection 2 of the Electoral Act, which talks about, it was specific as to candidates, political party who publicize, advertise, they understand, for the purpose of what? Between the 24 hours to the polls. Let me use the word, within 24 hours of the polls. So all what is going on now is not envisaged by the Electoral Act and cannot be said to be contrary to the provision of the Electoral Act. That is what I'm saying. Do you understand? That is what I'm That is what I'm saying, because the Electoral Act define what should be a public campaign. And if the Electoral Act has stated this, no rules or regulation of INEC can contravene this provision, express provision of the Electoral Act or any area of the Constitution that says this. So these are the issues. So INEC cannot do anything. Even if they trace it to a political party, yes. Does the law provide that public campaign should not be done? Let me use this word, should not be done. What the law only defines is what a public campaign should be, and it should be within 180 days. So, but it did not say that it should not be done. That is one thing you should understand. It should not say that it should not be done. Then the other area is these people the candidate? As at this time, can we say these people that their faces are showing are the candidates? I'll use that word again. Candidate of the political party? The answer is no.
All right. So earlier you did mention that the hands of INEC is kind of tied, but how damaging is this situation to their credibility, especially considering the trust deficit following the 2023 elections?
Well, I can't say it's damaged, because for as it stands now, we won't say that. If you look at the provisions I've quoted, particularly if you look at that section 221 down to 227, that also creates the functions of INEC. Then if you also look at section 2 of the Electoral Act 2022, you discover that the functions of INEC did not in any way has been affected by what is going on now in the public domain. Do you understand? Then the other issue of credibility, the issue of credibility goes beyond the fact that, okay, INEC is said to do this and they didn't do it. And I'll challenge anybody to come up to say, okay, where in the Electoral Act or in the Constitution or any known law that provides INEC to prosecute or to provide INEC, do you understand, to sanction any person? I'll use the word because as it is now, these are individuals who are trying to canvass within the fold of the public or their political parties. Some of them are just ghost chasers, while some of them are potential candidates. But it comes to play to contravene the provision of the law when those areas are clearly spelled out by the law. Remember, like I said, the regulation of INEC, these are regulation of INEC, yes, and it's also subject to the provision of the law. And INEC in its own volution does not have the power to sanction. It must definitely go to the court. And when it goes to the court, all these are issues that will come. So it has nothing to do with the credibility of INEC. But another thing again, it has, in a sense society, it has so many things to do as to the candidature of the individual. Because in the UK, not everything is law, but there are things we call morals and there are things we call high standard of a leader. So those are issues that the public as Nigerians will look at, that, okay, why are you going this extent? And you could see that these are played out in several political atmosphere outside Nigeria in a developed country. So it has nothing to do with the credibility of INEC.
So, politicians often claim the supporters, printed these posters without their knowledge. How can this loophole be closed legally to ensure accountability?
Yeah, this is where the civil society comes in now. The civil society has looked at the loopholes in the law and they've seen it to be a problem in the society. Now, what they should be pushing for is for the amendment of the Electoral Act to define what campaign should be, to define the extent of campaign and all that stuff. Yes, individuals can do that, even opponents. I could recall that the NBA conference that was just concluded, when we're going through clauses of the amended NBA constitution, it was struck down when there was a provision of the NBA, which is the Nigeria Bar Association constitution, that talks about campaign, issue of printing of this, and people in a reasonable term said it can be done by opposition. What will you say? So that can only come under that section 94, subsection 3, which also clearly stated that when the person is convicted, and that is within the window of 24 hours, a campaign, public campaign close or campaign close 24 hours to the polls. So anybody that does that, printing posters and all those stuff, that is where offense comes in. And what should be the process of INEC on that? INEC just need to petition the person or the people to the police. So they can't do anything. So for what we should be thinking of is how that electoral, this vacuum we've identified to become a problem in the society to be put into the Electoral Act. So, but for now, INEC is kind of handicapped. The society need to be educated as to these are the process and this is what this means.
All right. Well, you've actually spoken very well about how the civil society, you know, or what they need to do to ensure that this premature campaign culture does not erode the spirit of the Electoral Act, and also before the election season even begins. And you did mention that this pre-election activity should be treated as an electoral offense. And, you know, you talked about the police being responsible for the enforcement as well, right?
Yeah, let me correct. I didn't say it should be treated as an electoral offense because there is no law provided that makes such a provision. Do you understand? I did say that. Then another thing again is that I also did not. I also said that yes, the police are subject when a law is made to be a political, to be an offense, pre-election activities to be an offense. Yes, the police has that power because they are the watchman to the criminal, in the gate of the criminal justice system. They have that power. Then also, I will also say, in addition to the fact that where INEC also come in is to see that they check the books, financial books of political parties, so they'll be able to look at where expenditure comes in and out. But that does not automatically transmit into an offense or sanction that can be made by virtue of any no law that governs the electoral process in Nigeria.
Most big thank you to you, Mr. Tor Saroja, for having this conversation with us.
You're welcome.